Should be that one. Share. Okay, and from beginning now. Everybody see that okay, my presentation?
Yep, we see it.
Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit something different today because, as most people know, I've been involved in the subject of ufology for 38 years now, and I'm still learning. Believe it or not, 30 years in, I'm still learning. I'm finding new information, new data, new research areas, and of course, we changed the British Investigators Training Course to the UITC. It formulates into just the UFO Investigators Training Course because we don't need to teach people about the paranormal because it's all kind of one or all the same thing, really. The paranormal, ufological, spiritual, metaphysical, it kind of all rolls into the one when we start really delving into these subjects. But what fascinates me, traveling around the world, looking at UFO phenomena in given areas and listening to people's reports and doing investigations, some of which do take place in ancient sites. And that kind of got me involved in doing quite a bit of research in the technology of ancient sites, because it is absolutely flabbergasted me. I didn't realize. I mean, I thought when you see these things on television, these ancient sites, you think, well, it's nothing like being there, because when you're there, you see things for yourself and you witness things which haven't actually been on television or you hear very little about. So this presentation is going to be about those trips I've made and some of the information that I discovered, especially regarding the ancient rock cutting techniques, and they must have had some form of machinery, and I'm going to prove that obviously through this presentation. So what you can see here is the Great Pyramid in Egypt, and it is absolutely amazing. And it surprises me that on the cloudy days, you don't get to see the top of the pyramid because it's that high. On the cloudy days, the top part can sometimes disappear within the rain. It doesn't happen very often, but it just goes to show the immense size of this. But it is a unique pyramid. It's really the only one in the world that I know of that isn't actually 4 sides. It consists of 8 sides. Now, this was discovered some time ago by pilots that were flying over the Great Pyramid. And they were taken at a certain time when the shadow was just aligned across the Great Pyramid. And you started to see these unusual lines appear. And there is actually a slight concave to it, which means the Great Pyramid actually consists of 8 sides and not 4. Unlike the other 2 pyramids, which do have 4 sides on the Giza Plateau. So there's certainly something significantly different regarding the construction of the Great Pyramid compared to its 2 companions. And of course, we can see obviously these. You can clearly see the 8 sections here of the pyramid. I'm not aware of any other pyramid being 8-sided at this time, though most of them are usually 4. But when you start to really look close at the Great Pyramid, you start to see that not all of these are relatively, when I say small blocks, I mean, these things are probably about 5 foot high by about 6 foot long, and these are considered the small stones. But so underneath here, you can actually see very, very large, long blocks, some of them up to 20 feet in length. And what surprised me is that these aren't just all constructed from small stones. Beneath them are other rocks, which get bigger as you get nearer inside the pyramid. Now, of course, we do know that the Great Pyramid has lost a lot of its outside walls. The blocks of stone were taken away and utilized in other places. Really, those stones are really pillaged. But you can see underneath, which we wouldn't have normally seen, these great, very large blocks of stone, which we use as well within the construction. This is just the average size of the block. And I say it's about 5 foot high by 6 foot long. And it just goes to show that, obviously there's millions of these blocks that make up the whole Great Pyramid. But even just the small ones are tremendous size and weight. But what is interesting is that when you go around the far side of these pyramids and start really looking around, you see some unusual things. And the first thing that caught my eye here is that there seems to be a 3 construction process. Now, the first part, which is near this staircase, the laying of these stones are very, very similar, if not identical, to Teotihuacan and places like that in Peru and Bolivia, because the layout of these stones are identical in the way that they've been laid. Of course, we've got the old original pyramid here, the stones, but also the top layers, these are identical to the stones in Cusco in Peru. And if you actually know, I've made these 3 little markers on here because these stones have these unusual nodules that stick out. Nobody really knows about why these nodules are in existence. We don't know why they were created in that manner, but they are identical to the ones in Cusco. So we're looking at designs and information that obviously must have circumnavigated the globe in ancient times, because the same methods of construction were being utilized, and not just one method, a number of methods. We can see this is in Cusco in Peru when I visited, and again, this is what I'm talking about, these very unusual faced stones, and they've got these very unusual nodules on, and we're not really too sure why they actually have nodules on. Some people suggest that might have been something to do with moving the stones or lifting them or putting them into shape, but nobody really knows. It's a bit of a mystery, but these are identical to some of the stones on the outside of the Great Pyramid in Egypt, and not many people seem to note that there seems to be a significant connection in the designs between Peru and of course in Egypt. But what do we know really about the Inca civilization? Well, even that's a bit of a mystery itself. I mean, it was a vast city. And of course, at the time, like going back to the times when the Inca civilization was at its highest, they lived around the Lake Titicaca. And of course, it's one of the highest lakes in the world. And it is absolutely beautiful. And they had a number of places as well. They had islands situated around, which also had Inca dwellings on them. And this is one of them. This is known as the Island of the Sun. And as you can see in the Island of the Sun, this is Inca buildings which have been built. But I want you to notice that, you know, when you look at this design, it's very, very similar to what I see in Lancashire in the UK. They are pieces of stone which have been placed, and we have these very old walls in England, and Lancashire stone walls they're called. And the format of these are very, very similar. Now, it seems that the Inca had 2 different formats of construction. You can see again here how they just place stones, not in any really significant order, but this was a stone-built buildings, which are known as Inca dwellings. Another method of the second constructs of what they tried to do was they did put stone together, but then sometimes they rubbed mud onto them, and they became known as stone mud buildings. And the mud would dry very hard, like a cement, in a sense of speaking. But it'd always give this unusual color. So they had kind of the stone-built buildings, and they had these stone mud buildings, which they also used and are scattered around, and again known as Inca dwellings. And you can see a close-up here of what they did. These are the stones that they put up on the walls, and then they literally covered it by hand and smoothed the mud onto it, literally like a hard resin of clay. And when it dried, they were very, very strong, and also they would protect them against the weather as well. But when it comes to Tiwanaku, now the authorities would have us believe this is also Inca. Now, if this is Inca, then why are they building other buildings like just stone buildings and mud buildings? It's a significant different type of format of building whatsoever. This type of buildings, these types of walls, again, have these parts of this which is seen on the Great Pyramid in Egypt. Like I said, there's some stones which are like those in Cusco and Peru, and there's some stones like these as well, and they're absolutely fascinating. But the question is that why would they, these are apparently older, so why would they go backwards in their engineering styles of building? So the question has always arisen, did the Inca really build these ancient sites? And of course, we start getting into the theory that there may have been a civilization prior to the Inca. And of course, what's happened is that the Inca had relocated, found these sites, and sometimes even built some of their buildings on top of them. We're also responsible as the gateway of the sun. Now, again, this was once part of a larger building, and this isn't its natural resting place, no matter how many people may visit it and listen to stories that this is how they found it. They never did find it like this. In fact, it was almost buried in the ground. Some of it had fallen apart, and it was literally re-put up and put into its position. So it's not in its normal resting position, though it's probably very close. But the information that this stone, and it was originally all cut from one piece of stone, is tremendous. The angles, the measurements, the information that is just within the carvings alone are fascinating. There's a serious amount of work it's gone into this, heavily involved in geometry and mathematics. And also, if the initially would have been aligned to the stars, and it has been realigned again now to the stars as it originally would have been when it was first discovered. But some of these sites have these stones, and you think to yourself, how on earth did they manage to cut into these stones? Now, we are told that these tools used by our ancient ancestors were things like chisels and blocks of stone to chip away at. But the problem is that the chisels used, kind of copper or brass, were reasonably soft. I mean, there is what you might refer to is a hard level. Now, the levels of hardness are measured in rocks. Now, most of these constructions are carried out in granite rock. And granite rock is tremendously strong and has a hard level of around about 7 to 7.5 out of 10. Now, the problem is that the tools are only 3.5 to 4 in level. So, in fact, the tools are soft compared to the rock. The rock is a lot harder than the tools they are themselves. So there was absolutely no way they could have used the tools they used to create this method. Of course, there's a perfect little channel there, as you can see, cut perfectly into the rock. These are so shaped perfectly that you could still, even today, you could possibly cut your finger on the corner of these stones. They are that sharp still. But what also is intriguing me is that they're perfectly apart, these holes. And they are drill holes by all intents and purposes. They look to have been drilled into the granite stone. And we have absolutely no way of knowing how they managed to do that. There has been suggestions that they have some ideas of rubbing, but it would have taken forever. And what devices would they have used, to cut through granite? As it is, I say, it is an extremely hard rock. We have exactly the same methods of using hard rocks cut to perfection at Puma Punku. These H-type blocks, which people have talked about many, many times, and again, were scattered and buried and covered in silt originally. They were not found in the resting place they are today. Now, considering how high this is in altitude, Puma Punku, and they were covered in silt, suggests that there was likely a terrible catastrophe must have taken place, and maybe some type of tidal or, well, a wave of some sort, because the amount of silt that covered these, buried them, some of them 18 feet down below the surface. And of course, there are around those locations, there has been digs and unusual skulls have been found. Some of them are elongated, some of them exceptionally elongated, and are not deformities. And some research that has been carried out by Brian Forster, who also has been analysing some of these skulls, is demonstrated the fact that there's evidence to support the fact that these were not skulls which were wrapped to cause a constriction on the head and cause this elongation. This was not boarding, because we know that according to the x-rays and the analysis of these skulls, the neck where it joined onto the body is set further back on the skull than it would be normally on a human. And that would, the only purpose for that was to support the weight of the head. So it's likely that they were actually born like this. And these are referred to as pre-Inca. So who were this mysterious civilization that literally history is wiped from our books and our memories? It seems that it's a forgotten civilization that may have had incredible technologies in regarding stonemasonry, and how they managed to do the work is still unknown. But when you look at Inca, this is the general image that is accepted as an Inca person, and they don't have elongated heads. So we are actually looking at possibly a completely different type of civilization, one civilization that was certainly prior to the Inca civilization where we find them today. But they didn't stay there for very long. They had to leave Lake Titicaca due to severe droughts. And of course, obviously, they needed to have water and better ways to farming land. So they relocated. The civilization relocated. And of course, they passed through the Sacred Valley outside Cusco. And then on their travels, they came across these other walls. Now, there was another tribe, another civilization known as the Wari. And this is a Wari construction. Again, it's very, very similar to the Inca stone buildings, very similar to Lancashire walls throughout the United Kingdom, but they do stand for a very, very long time. But these are the sorts of things that you kind of come across. Now, some of these old photographs. Here you can see clearly that there's a pre-Inca construction that's taken place. Huge blocks, perfectly aligned, no concrete, no way of sealing them. They are perfectly shaped to fit on top of each other. Many of them are keystone together. There are little key locks where they pour metal in and locked the stones together. That's a very clever method because they knew about earthquakes, they knew about tremors, and they wanted to make sure that their buildings lasted the time, and still they're standing today. But above this pre-Inca building, you can see the Inca have built some of their own on top of the pre-existing build, which so you can clearly see the difference between the two. Pre-Inca construction was nothing like Inca construction. Again, we can also see here the Koricancha. This is at the center of Cusco. This is pre-Inca. And of course, they built up this kind of temple. And that is also Inca. That's Inca, and this is pre-Inca. And there is a significant difference. I mean, this wall is amazing. And the curve on it is incredible. And of course, though there has been very, very little shifting in it, it still stands very erect these days. But the location there has a number of stones where you can see how they poured metal in to lock these stones together. It was an incredible feat, but it's not one it's not heard of. We have this all around the world in many, many different places. Vietnam, South America, Australia, these places are all around the world. And though they might slightly change in design shape, the existence of this knowledge of locking stones together so that they would withstand the time of earthquakes and any tremors is amazing. So again, it demonstrates that this knowledge must have circumnavigated the globe. In the middle of Koricancha is this unusual box. Initially, it was thought to be a well, but nobody really knows what it is. Now, they purposely put these plants around so that you don't step over and look in, because it is perfectly cut. I can only give it as an example. It's like the stone tomb that you might find in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. It is perfectly cut piece of granite, and nobody really knows what it was for. It's a bit of a mystery. But as you can see, the number 8 here is the Koricancha. And number 1 up here is Sacsayhuaman. And underneath, traveling all this distance throughout all these different ancient sites is an underground tunnel. It's actually cut through the bedrock, though it's sealed off and you cannot go in there, and it's very little known that this exists. But there is an underground cave system which has been cut out of the bedrock purposely, so it's not natural, following a perfect straight line through all these ancient sites, all the way to Sacsayhuaman. And as you can see in Cusco, you can see that the civilization that once lived there, this pre-Inca civilization, there were ruins. A lot of them were ruins. And there were even ruins by the time the Spaniards got there. But they have been utilized. You know, they have built buildings on top of them because the foundations are rock solid. They will never move. You know, they are key locked. And whoever was going to build buildings thought, well, we might as well utilize the foundations of the pre-Inca, because, you know, that's exceptional foundations. And of course, you can see where throughout the years there've been some patchwork, but, you know, nevertheless, though, some of these rocks are incredible. And as you can see, there's one that's chipped away here, unfortunately, and I think that was actually due to an accident with a vehicle. But you can see this was a perfectly curved stone, just like the top one. And they're perfectly placed upon each other without using any cement, any mortar. And you cannot, I mean, when people say you cannot fit a piece of paper between them, you can't. I've tried it. I've been there. And you can't. I wanted to put that to the test. Is it really true what you hear on television? It is. You cannot put a piece of paper between them. They are still precisionally placed today as they were thousands and thousands of years ago. And right at this location on this corner, there was a dig done about 15, 16 years back. And these skulls were found. And they're in the Ica Museum now. But you know what? They're very, very, they do not talk about the skulls very much. They say no analysis has taken place. The only analysis I'm aware it's taken place is what Brian Forster managed to do. And that's only because he was very lucky to come across a full skeleton of one of these beings. But they are on display. They don't tell you anything much about them, but they tried and passed them off as Inca. But the Inca didn't look like that. And this is where the confusion lies. This is probably the most finest built wall in Americas. And it's again in Cusco. I've walked past this a number of times. It is perfectly flat. And it is so flat, it's to the micron. 0.0.18 out. It's got the same precision on alignment on this wall than it has in the Great Pyramid. So we talk about how accurate they were lined, and it's exactly the same process. You can see obviously that some extra work had been taking place. This is probably at the time when the Spaniards were there. You know, they weren't very good at all at building. So some of this work has been carried out by when the Spaniards went there. Again, on the right-hand side, this was done by Spanish conquistadors, and they came over. And of course, to the left, you've got the original pre-Inca wall. Now, what's interesting is that they actually dressed the back of the stone just as much as the front of the stone. I mean, you think to yourself, well, you know, why dress the back of the stone when it's not on view? But they did. They dressed the back of the stone. There's been tests where stones have been taken out. When you look at the other side of them, they're dressed and as much detail is on them as they are on the front. So they went to great lengths to do that. This is just a fascinating wall. And I was unaware when visiting that there may be symbolisms within the wall, such as snakes and pumas. And I didn't know that at the time when I visited. And some of these nodules, again, we didn't know what they were, but some of them are purposely placed to represent certain parts of an animal, be it a nose or a nostril. Here's a perfect picture that you can see the outline of this puma, and this little piece here is this stone, and there's a slight groove there representing the puma's eye. And of course, this little nodule here was not there by accident. This is actually part of the nostril. So we can see that obviously this symbolism was very, very important to them. And again, here, you know, this nodule is represented as an eye, because what we're actually seeing here is maybe some type of snake or serpent. And of course, we can see this shape in the rock representing the mouth. And again, obviously, one of these nodules representing the eye. But stone laying like this is not just in Peru or Bolivia or even in Egypt. We also find it in China. This is the Imperial Palace wall in China. And again, you can see how rocks have been cut to perfection. And again, you won't find many places where you'll be able to slide anything between these. And there's no mortar, there's no concrete. And exactly the same process has happened. We're looking at two different processes here, larger ones and smaller ones. The smaller ones that came later, but have been fitted together exactly the same process. So again, you know, this information was probably worldwide. And we can see it in many constructs around the world. This was a famous area in Japan. But when we go to Easter Island, now Easter Island is so far out on its own, you think that we wouldn't have, you know, wouldn't have much information there, which would be correlate with other places around the world. But that's not true. I mean, in fact, in Easter Island, you'll find things there which correlate to other places at that time around the world. So that even that knowledge even reached such an island in the middle of nowhere back then. But what's probably the most interesting thing, we do know there's these large statues on Easter Island, and most of them were kind of looking to the sky. But in the center of Easter Island, you've got this unusual shaped wall. Now, it's not a very good wall. It's just thrown boulders together. Nobody knows where it come from, who built it. But right at the center of Easter Island, this is where it's located, it's at the center of Easter Island, and right at the center of these boulders is one spherical large stone. And it's perfect. It's very similar to the Costa Rica stones. And we have no idea. There's only one of these on Easter Island, and this is it. Nobody knows why it's there, who put it there, how it was constructed, and or what it actually even represents. Nobody really knows. But you can find this, and there's only one of them on Easter Island. And it's, to me, this is a larger mystery, you know, as opposed to the stone faces. I mean, though that they were huge, you know, some of them were carved so big that they never actually lifted them from the ground. But you know, there is ways that certain things could be lifted through the process of ropes. But there isn't many trees on Easter Island, and most people that visit there will tell you that. So exactly how they managed to do all these things is a little bit unknown. But for me, one of the largest mysteries is this very unusual stone sphere, and it is a perfect sphere. Nobody knows where it's come from. And again, you've got the same type of wall constructions in Easter Island, the same idea, the same methodology. You know, where did this come from? Why was it built? Who built them? And again, perfectly cut, cannot fit a piece of paper between them, and a very unusual stone in the middle here. You know, it's as if like, well, you know, why do that? Why do we not just cut this stone rectangular? There's something about the symbolism. It's like if it's going to be difficult, then we're going to do it. You know, nothing was an easy achievement. There was no stone edges on these. These are completely rounded as they are in Cusco, and weighing a tremendous weight. But it would seem that they tried to achieve something which was remarkably difficult, and that's the same pattern we tend to see around the planet. There's a close-up of that stone. It's been fitted in here. So you got 4 stones and this little insert. Now that insert goes all the way through. It's not just the front part of it. It's shaped like that and goes all the way through. And it is about 3 foot thick. It goes all the way through. So it was a very clever piece of engineering. And it just goes to show how much they will do that. This is in fact a 2.5 foot rod in that shape, which slides in and fits and fills this gap in the stones. But this stone has been perfectly cut. That isn't chipped away and they've had to fill it. This has been purposely cut stone to fit this piece in. Again, it's like representing that that it's kind of laughing in our faces. It just drives us mad. You know, I mean, as if it's not difficult enough to move these stones around, that they leave these clues of tremendous engineering, and we've just sat scratching our heads thinking not only why, but how on earth did they do it? This is exactly the same thing in other places. The Inca did exactly the same thing. They tried to copy some of this. It wasn't successful. You know, I mean, you've got big gaps between these. The stones aren't dressed. They're not sharp. They're not cut very well. And but they did try. The Inca did try occasionally to try and copy the pre-Inca constructions, but they just failed. They didn't do very well at all. And of course, the back of these stones are not dressed. They're just they've even taken any care to the back of these stones. As you can see, this is one of the back of the stones. There's no care at all to these whatsoever. So Sacsayhuaman, I've been there a couple of times, and I have to say it is a very, very interesting location. And of course, again, we have these wonderful stones. You know, it's only the shadowing between these stones that makes them look like there's a gap, but there isn't, because there's a bevel on every single stone. It's been perfectly beveled. It's as like when you look at them and run your hands across them, you can imagine like as if they were once like Play-Doh, you know, and they were just shaped into cubes, you know. And there has been that suggestion that maybe they had the technique of somehow as making a molten form of rock, utilizing chemicals, and that these things were placed in a way where they were soft while it was soft. And of course, you've got these unusual effects of curving. There is no one straight stone at all, not one straight stone in the whole complex. As you can see, and you cannot again fit a piece of paper between these. You'll be very, very lucky to find anywhere where there's a suitable gap. No mortar, no concrete. And they said that these things were mined from 72 miles away. So, you know, why would they do this? It's an incredible fortress. And just so to show, look at the bend on this rock. I'm pointing to it here because I wanted to let people know, you know, they've fashioned this stone perfectly to follow the contour of the rock below. It is as if that they are both being perfectly aligned and fitted together, so that not in one piece here can you actually get much of a gap. It is actually incredible engineering. But they were very clever, these pre-Inca, because they had running water. They built these channels to capture rain and distribute fresh water, sometimes for miles upon miles. They had aqueducts and waterways. They had water crisscross the land and go from one location to another. They were very, very clever people. This is the largest stone, which you can find at Sacsayhuaman. It's huge. It's very, very large. Well, of course, you can see that even this stone has been cut purposely. Now, these aren't done by accidentally. They purposely cut these rocks for fitting these ones in together. Maybe it creates better stability. We don't really know. We know that they are, again, they're likely to be key locked together. But this is one of the largest stones at the fortress. Some of them have some unusual markings on, and it is said that there is also the idea that some of these were melted to some degree, said to have been treated to up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. How 1,000 degrees Celsius was generated to apply to these stones is a little unknown, but the evidence is in the chemical analysis. And also, what's also interesting is that, again, just like in Cusco, there are hidden images within the stones. This is a picture of Brian Forster, and above here, he wanted to point out that this is, in fact, as again, like representing a puma, is a puma paw, as you can see, in the 4 toes. They are hidden away, these symbolisms, but they are there. And of course, the puma was obviously a significant symbol for them, as well as the snake. But there are other places around. Now, this rock here, which is perfectly cut, it's as if it steps, and it's perfectly more or less level. And of course, this is a level 7 in strength, and bronze tools are only 3.5. They say they use bronze tools to make these. There's absolutely no way. The rock is twice harder than the tools that they must have used to cut it with. And these are some of the tools that have been discovered in the location. You know, there's no way that these tools could have done that. It's an improbability. You can just see that we're only 1/10 of a degree difference, and that is it's minuscule. I mean, they more or less are absolutely level. And how did they measure that? I mean, we would have to use pieces of equipment to measure that. How would they measure that to 1/10 of a degree? It's just like the Great Pyramids. We have no idea how. There's no way you could just do that from sight. It's microscopic. But we have to utilize pieces of equipment like this to get that level of information, 1/10 of a degree difference. Now, here's a perfect example. This is a place called Pisac, Peru. And what you've got here is evidence. The evidence of the pre-construction of pre-Inca on the right-hand side, completely different method of building. The whole process is completely different. And on the left-hand side, you've got Inca, where they've used actually some mud to hold this wall together. This is an Inca build. And there's no way that whoever built this built that. So I believe that obviously this is a location that they found. They believe it's obviously very significant because there was a pre-Inca construction there, and they built their own alongside it. We are talking two different variations of building, probably if maybe in 1,000, these are a lot older, maybe 1,000 years older than the Inca builds themselves. As you travel around, there's a lot of unusual things you see. And just like we get these portals or doorways, whatever you want to call them, the rooms that don't go anywhere. In fact, this whole area has been cut out of a cliffside. It's very, very strong rock, and it's angled in a certain way. And there is a doorway, but the doorway only goes into about 2 or 3 foot, and then there's nothing. It's a doorway, it doesn't go anywhere. And we see these doorways that don't seem to go anywhere all around the world. And when we talk about these places, people often talk about portals, stargates, doorways, passageways to another reality, another parallel universe, the land of the gods, many different names for them. And this is one of them. And there are a few of these I've actually visited, and they all tend to be the same thing, which you can see is a closer image. Now, if you actually look at these perfect design, smooth cut walls. How did they cut this out, by the way? I mean, how do you cut behind the stone to get it nice and smooth? How did it get it so smooth? It's an improbability they could have done that with just pieces of stone and copper tools. This is perfectly cut, very sharp edges. And what's more of a mystery is they will call these false doors is why did they construct them? This is Ollantaytambo. And there's 3 levels of construction at Ollantaytambo. It's gone to possibly pass through 3 different types of civilizations. Initially, people used to think these were giant steps. I remember many years ago, people saying, oh, the giants lived there because they've got these giant steps. Well, these are actually, this is a 2001 photograph. This is 2015. These are purpose-built terraces, because the problem is that with growing fruits and vegetables was that they needed a flat surface to cultivate them. And the best way to do it was to construct your own. So whoever built this amazing place built these terraces purposely to house vegetables, capture water, to grow fruit, and they could be utilized. I mean, also taking into consideration that this is also a bit of a safety feature, I suppose. If you're going to fall, you're only likely to fall about 10 feet, as opposed from the cliff sides, if they were left as they were extremely dangerous. But they do look a little bit like giant steps, I do have to say. And as you head further up, you can see these wonderful, again, perfect stone walls, again, unusual shaped stones. Not one single stone is identical to any other. They're all independently different. And of course, again, you can see these gaps and you think, how did they do that? I mean, this is quite an altitude as well. How did they get the stones up there? I mean, it's just something we wouldn't even consider doing today because the task would be too difficult. And yet these thousands and thousands of tons of stone were taken up, cut to perfection to fit against the next rock, and perfectly shaped. No mortar, no cement, cannot fit a piece of paper between them. And this is one major of the parts of the construction of Ollantaytambo. But up at the top is probably one of the most significant finds. Was once a temple, and these are huge. This is about the size of a bus, and it's huge. How they got it up there, I really don't know, but it's not just one. There are many of them. And what is interesting about these is that there has been movement. So there's something must have happened thousands of years ago where where the earth shook so dramatically or something moved these heavy rocks. It's the only reason why some of these must have moved. There's no other way we could have moved these apart from maybe a tremendous earthquake, something which would have pushed against the stones, causing these problems. Again, these were precisionally aligned. You can see one of these stones here. This one is moved to its side. There's been some movement in the stone. Some of these large stones, like this back one, had tipped over onto its side. What type of incident would happen where you can move these, the tremendous weight of these stones and tip them over? You wouldn't tip that over if you ran it with a car into it. You could not tip that over. And yet there it is, tipped over on its side. So something significant must have taken place in the past. All these stones were once all together. No gaps were in these. But what happened is obviously something tremendously, a catastrophe maybe, something significant happened in the past which separated these stones. There was movement. And later the Inca came along and filled them up with their type of stones, as you can see in between. So the Inca were utilizing pre-Inca builds. These are just tremendous. They're huge size temple walls, and these continue right around, and they're absolutely enormous. You cannot even imagine what it would take to lift these stones a foot, let alone thousands of feet in altitude. It's just cannot imagine how on earth they would have done that. But each stone again is dressed. Again, so even though that these are larger stones, they have nodules on them. Here we can see two types of construction. Originally, probably pre-Incan doorway, and of course above it you can see that the Inca have put their own construction on top of it. So they were clearly utilizing this place. Here's another prime example. This is a beautiful arch. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. But again, you can see exactly the same nodules on this stone wall here. Exactly the same as one that's found in Cusco, and this is a photograph from 1930. And above, in 1930, it was discovered that the Inca had built on top of a pre-Inca build. So the evidence is still there. Even back in 1930 on these photographs, you can still see the evidence that, a pre-existing civilization had come along and obviously built the main construction, and then the Inca came along and built on top of it. But they are perfectly cut stones, some of them. And how are they cut? We also see this in actually Egypt as well. And some of these rocks are perfectly cut. They're not chiseled, it's actually cut, this piece of stone. We have no idea how they managed to do that. And again, perfect 90-degree angle cuts. You got to take into consideration they're not supposed to have had machinery. They're not supposed to have the tools that we utilize to find a straight edge these days. So how they managed to do this is just unknown. And it's remarkable that they extracted stone right from the bedrock. They cut this piece of stone out here. But the biggest question is, how did they cut the back of it? How did they get to the back of this stone? And just to add insult to injury, when you look at these methods, they actually left the piece of stone there. This stone fits in one of those places, and it's smooth on both sides. How did they cut the back of the stone to cut it out the bedrock? I mean, I've asked a few people, they just shake their heads and wonder with no explanation how they could have done it. Not without using certain machinery. We would not probably be able to do that these days. Only with probably the best pieces of equipment that we've got, we might be able to manage it. But they seemingly had no problem cutting stone. Now, if you go on the normal tour, you'll find that through Ollantaytambo that you won't get to see everything. You have to get off the tour, go around the back of Ollantaytambo. You come across these areas where it's these cut shells, and it looks like there's machine cuts in the rock. It's absolutely incredible. Nobody knows. It's like somebody's just put a slice across there, just cut a piece out. But with what and how did they do it? And what are these score marks? They are perfectly the same size as well. So it just seems like there was some type of machinery that was involved in cutting. This is a very large mountain. It's known as Pekuluyuna. And of course, here, just here, you might not be able to see it, but I'm going to zoom in. There's a very large face, as you can see. Now, a number of people have suggested that it was just an unusual marking in the rocks, but it's been reanalyzed and it's known to be actually it's manufactured. Though it has lost some of it. Its nose is a little bit missing, but it was purposely built, and this is 500 foot in height. It's a tremendous feat, but it was done. There was some little bits of construction up here as well, so we do know that they were actually in this area. And of course, that is a very, very old carved face, 500 feet in height. Of course, we know Machu Picchu, and it is very, very famous site. Said to have took 30 years to build. I would have thought longer, to tell you the truth. But it is an amazing feat. And of course, it was up in the mountains so high that you would never have known it was there. It was literally found by accident, and it's, again, you can see the terraces. These terraces are used for a number of reasons. And it's very popular, but we look back in 1911. This is the same location in 1911. And these aren't there anymore. They've completely disappeared. Nobody knows where they've gone. But this is a photograph and shows the pre-Inca builds. The pre-Inca build sites here using huge rocks. And you can see one of them from 1913. These people working for this scientist dug down about 4 or 5 foot and found elongated skulls at this location at the top of the mountain. But unfortunately, these are actually missing now. No, we don't actually know where they've gone. But what remains there is incredible. The workmanship is unbelievable. And these are the ones known as the 3 windows. And they are absolutely unique. On the top of the mountain, you come across this. And this is known as the magnetic post. It's known as the hitching post. And it's sun quartz and iron granite. It's incredibly strong. But this isn't a rock. This is, in fact, the top of the mountain. Everything else has been taken away. This is the top of the mountain. And the magnetics that this gives out is absolutely ridiculous. This was first discovered, in 1906, I think it was when people were going up there through to 1916, 1918, 1923. And of course, a number of sequences of photographs. It's still there today. This is known as the hitching post, and it's very acute magnetics. These are scientists watching the compass spin completely around and around and around. And though that is very difficult to get there now, you can't actually get up there to see this. It's a shame. I don't know why they tend to hide it. When I went there, I couldn't get to see it, unfortunately. I would have loved to. But and certainly conducted a test, but that seems to be the case, the situation there. But the whole mountain is magnetic, so you have to question, why did the pre-Inca have such a fascination with magnetic locations? And that might actually tie into a lot of strange phenomena, including the UFO phenomenon as well. There are places built in caves. This is on the far side, the back of Machu Picchu. You would never know it's there unless you got off the beaten track. There are caves with dwellings in there. Again, these unusual arched doors, but again, built to perfection. Of course, this is a very famous, well-known, it's known as the Amaru, the Gate of the Gods. Stories suggest that this is some type of doorway or portal, like many others that exist around the world. But more so, it's interesting, is that I want to draw your attention to exactly the same sort of process here of these strange, unusual criss-cross markings. What caused them? We see this time and time again on smaller scales to grander scales, but we don't know what they are. They're certainly manufactured for their purposes. It isn't a geological phenomenon. It is, they have been actually manufactured, and it's just a big mystery. No matter where you go, you'll come across just little quirky things. Like this little thing is the workmanship in this is incredible, and it's very strong rock, but it's just on its own. Nothing, not connected to anything else. It's just like there on its own. What is it? Why did anybody do that? You know, it's very, very unusual. You do find these little quirky little things just there for no apparent reason, with nothing else around. This one fascinates me because this stone is an absolute maze of cuts. I can only imagine that, you know, maybe they had some process of cutting rock and it was very easy. And it looks to me like this is just a test rock. Or they have allowed the children, it's a children's playground. The kids can go and cut rock, go and do some cuts and things and tests. So this just comes across as like it's profound, it's quirky. I don't know what it's for. Um, and there's all sorts of different types of cuts on them. But it's as if it looks like it was so easy to cut them. And what instruments could they have done to cut them so easily? It really is mind-boggling. The workmanship at Puma Punku is incredible. These right angles again, but the digging in on rock is tremendously difficult, and even to get a perfect finish is even harder. This is rose stone quartz. It's incredibly strong. But Puma Punku was like this when it was first discovered. It's nothing like what you see it today. Some of these were buried up to 18 feet down in silt. This is like a deposit of soil and silt, as if a wave had washed over the place and just dropped silt, you know, on top of them and buried the whole site. Stones being knocked over. I mean, to take into consideration at 13,000 feet here, what could have happened? Well, it's interesting to know that, you know, you do find fossils up there, fossils of fish, fossils of shells, you know, so, you know, what really did happen back thousands and thousands of years ago is a real mystery, but it certainly seems to be some evidence of some major catastrophe. As I say, the H spots are like this now, but they were never discovered like that. And of course, they do seem to have any tool marks on them. They're a real big mystery. In Tiwanaku, these are all one giant slab, you know, and we don't know what was there. Whatever was there is gone now. But these are only what remains at Tiwanaku. But these are some of the biggest stones, and the elevation that they were able to get them up there would have been tremendous. And these are some of the, like I said, are some of the largest stones you'll discover in Peru. Well, there are lots of interesting carvings on the side of these. But this one fascinated me because it's full of drill holes. There are hundreds. These aren't parasites. These aren't plants going out into them. This is a very strong piece of rock. And these have been purpose holes placed into it. I don't know if it was a test piece of rock, but there are holes all over it. It's as if it's been drilled hundreds and hundreds of times. It's just a mystery. No idea how that could have been done. But when you get to Bolivia, those holes seemed insignificant. This is an entire mountain top cut out. What for? We have no idea. Unusual shapes, ledges. You know, we've no idea why this was done. This is obviously a more newer construction from Inca times, but all this, which stretches for a good mile, is all pre-Inca, and we have no idea what that represents. Absolutely no idea, and the task at hand just to do that is remarkable. But when we talk about 1,400-year-old advanced ancient drilling technology, this is something which has obviously been talked about many times. Drilling and coring through ancient rock. How was it done? In fact, you can actually see revolution marks of something as if it has been cored out. You can see these marks. But we have no idea how they was done in these incredible strong rocks. You see here, you can actually see the revolutions as there's something is bored in to this rock. What could have been bored into there? What is stronger than this rock that it could have used? We really no idea. But like I did say, I mean, they do distribute water for miles upon miles in Peru. They're still there collecting water and traversing it along for miles and miles and miles to other ancient locations. They did have an ancient waterway system. They were very, very clever. And of course, we talked earlier about the Easter Island Costa Rica balls. This is one in Costa Rica. There was one found in Easter Island, not quite as large as this, probably half the size, but nevertheless on its own, and it was a mystery. And these are mystery. We don't know what they are. What were they moved for? You know, they've been nicknamed God's marbles. You know, we really have no idea. But there are plentiful of them. They haven't really been moved. A lot of them are still found in the resting location throughout Costa Rica. But you'll find them in people's back gardens in Costa Rica. They built around them. They built homes around them that ended up in somebody's backyard, you know, and lots of research has been carried out, and they are perfect spherical, perfectly. So the workmanship in that alone is absolutely incredible. We've no idea what they were used for by ancient our ancient ancestors. But many years ago, when they were digging out forests and jungles, they came across these scattered around, as if they weren't really supposed to be there, but may have been moved. But so was there a catastrophe? They ended up having to chain these things to get them out of the way when clearing the jungles. It's as if, like, so as many described, maybe a catastrophe happened and these were just simply swept away into different locations, and that is where they found them, in the middle of jungles, you know. And then, of course, this is one where they're making way for new builds in the jungle, in the swamps, and they're having to drag them out. But what's interesting in this book, Trolleys to the Sur, the story of the Los Angeles Pacific Railway. When they were actually building the Los Angeles Pacific Railway, they had to clear land and had to move small hills and things to just make a path through. And this is some of the old cranes they used to move land to prepare for this railway. And when they did so, they found hundreds of these stone balls buried under silt, under hills. And of course, well, at that time, they didn't really know what they were. It was suggested that they were dinosaur eggs, but they were never dinosaur eggs. They just didn't know what they were. You can see a very large collection here. But they are seen all over the world. This is not just seen in Costa Rica. This is in Russia, off the Franz Josef Island. Again, there's another one here. And not just one, there are a number of them. But we don't know where they come from. We don't know why they're manufactured. We don't know what they're used for. Some of them are extremely large. Again, you can see this one here. And they are, some of them, extremely large, as you can see. They're also found in Bosnia. I mean, this just looks like a scene straight out of a sci-fi movie. Swampland. But there they are. You know, they're just situated. Nobody knows what they are or what they were used for, or who even built them. But they are perfect spherical spheres. Here's a very large one from Bosnia, extremely large. They're also found in Siberia. As you can see, construction workers were having to remove them, relocate them. They didn't know what they were for, but they were ancient, old. They're also found in New Zealand, as you can see. Italy has had a number of them been discovered. There's one gentleman who found one in his garden, who sat on it. And they're, again, perfectly spherical, with no identification as to who built them, why they were built, what they were used for. This one's in China. Again, you can see it's the height of the vehicle. It's very large. But when we talk about
just a heads up, Steve, you have about 12 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So when we talk about stone cutting, there are techniques that must have been used to do this, you know, and sometimes it has been suggested that the information obtained from these cuts shows that a saw must have been used. And sometimes a saw may have actually been up to 6 meters in size. And sometimes the width is like an eighth of an inch. Look at this perfect cut saw mark. This is a saw mark. You can tell when you look inside, you can see there's a revolution that's taken place. This is a saw mark in solid basalt near the base of the Great Pyramid. Nobody tends to look for these. People get off the coaches and go and view the Egyptian pyramids. But what they're walking on has got mysterious anomalies in them. They're walking on bedrock, which have got these strange and profound cuts in them. You can also find, this is an example. This is a core drill mark in granite stone, yeah, on the pyramid site of Abisha. And of course, this one is a normal cut core drill mark into concrete using modern day tools. There is no difference between them. If you actually saw this in an ancient site, you'd think it's just not the same as all the others. There's no difference between them whatsoever. So where is all the machinery? They must have machinery, but where's it all gone? I mean, that insult to injury, the Egyptians even left the cores behind, and you could see what they cored out. You could see the revolution marks. If you run a piece of thread across this, you'll go round and round and round and round and round and round and round, and eventually you'll come to the bottom. This has been cored out. It's by some type of equipment that is rotating and can cut through one of the hardest stones in the world. This is rose quartz granite, and it's an incredible discovery. But there's a number of these which are in the Egyptian Museum. Again, the finest detail. You can see these constructions of how it's been cored out. We know that they cut marks. This might have just been a test, on a piece of rock, but there are saw marks within these. Again, Egyptian. And we do know that these some rocks which are absolutely huge. Baalbek is one of the largest in the world. We used to think it was the largest cut stone, but there is actually one more bigger. And of course, we can see these huge stones still not actually been used, but they're still in the construction sites, the quarries. They're gigantic. Again, you've got some unusual markings on these, as if they've been cut by some type of machinery. Well, some have never been lifted, but they have unusual scoop marks in them. Strange scoop marks can be found on them as if they scooped them out like a piece of ice cream. It's just what causes these unusual scooping marks. We don't know, but it looks to be machinery. But in China, we can find places like the Yangshan Quarry, some of the biggest cut pieces of stone in the world, 16,250 metric tons, unusual cut saw marks. It's an incredible place. This is probably the most biggest cut stone ever existed on planet Earth. Makes the Baalbek stone look miniature, doesn't it? We would have never lifted it, of course, I would have thought. And we see cut stone through all sorts of different types of granites in Ethiopia. These are full rock cut churches, all one piece of stone, cut out, all one piece of stone made out to be a building, a temple. It was once all the rooms are cut out. How they actually did this is just remarkable. Nobody really knows about the technology that could have been used, even full cities, a full town, temples, all cut out of single piece of stone. We find them all around the world. We have no idea what they represent. Some of them are resonant chambers, just odd pieces of stone lying in China for no apparent reason. Nobody knows what they're used for. One that was purposely cut, looks like they've sliced it as pieces of bread. But this thing is huge. It's the size of a block building. Some of them got zigzag cuts through them. How did they do these zigzag cuts? What type of machinery could have done that to cut through this type of deep rock? Holes everywhere, all over the world, saw marks, holes. You can see the revolution. Again, rose quartz granite, 2 to 3 millimeters per rotation here, being used by some type of machinery. And how do you core out a star shape in Russia? It's incredible. Or this one down here in bottom left, which is from Norway. On a microscope, you can see the core mark, rotation, cutting out. They used to have to use incredible pieces of technology. Hardest rock in the world, rose quartz crystal, one piece of stone cut out to this amazing statue in Egypt. How did they do it? Nobody really knows. We have so many things all around the world. That rock is so perfect. It's like glass. This is Saqqara in Egypt. We have really no explanation. The outside of these boxes, by the way, in Saqqara, Egypt, were in fact had hieroglyphics on, but they're very, very poor. They're terrible, actually. It's really poor compared to the box being made. Whoever built the box, we don't think it's the Egyptians. I think the Egyptians found them and put their details on the side, but this is very, very poor compared to the manufacture of the box itself. And it's absolutely perfect, and we don't know what it housed. Rumors have it was the prize cows of the pharaohs, but I doubt that very much. And just to finish off, you know, this incredible hard rock known as diorite stone, which is one of the hardest levels. It's measured at a level 8, you know, of hard rock. And they have these statues built out of them. There is nobody.
Are you talking about some of the planets where there are certain things that
There is nobody on earth, a stonemason would ever try and achieve to cut rock into diorite. It's just not heard of. But it is perfect. So much perfect that it had to have been used by some type of CNC stone cutter to cut this, because on computer, we know that it's completely symmetric. We know that even people, the best people in the world when conducting statues, building statues' faces, not one side of the face is ever identical to the other side. But it is on these. It's as if a machine has cut them out to perfection. And again, all we're told is that these are the tools that they use. Copper tools, stone mauls, and there's absolutely no way that these could have ever been used to achieve the things that we're finding. Thank you very much.